When a retired colonel encounters a police officer accustomed to impunity, a routine stop on the highway becomes the start of a war for justice. He thought he had the situation under control, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. What begins with one illegal order escalates into a chase, a struggle, and a courtroom battle, capable of changing the system. This is a story of a woman who did not back down and made everyone listen to the power that can be silent, yet deadly. Don't forget to subscribe and like to not miss out on new stories. The road was empty, and the sky above it was as gray as the asphalt. The car moved steadily, like a horse at a trot. Celine Marshall, a colonel in the U.S. Army, was not in uniform and not on base at that moment. She was in ordinary jeans, a simple black turtleneck, a jacket, and her hair tied back in a bun, the image of an unremarkable civilian woman. Unless you looked into her eyes, which held something others did not. A calm honed by years of service, and a sharpness like a hawk's that sees every turn, even on the ground. Her left hand rested on the wheel, her right on the gear shift. Her fingers tapped in rhythm with the song barely audible from the speakers. She was driving from Fort Glen, a closed base near the border with New Mexico, where she had just completed a 2-week course in command planning. Back to the state of Grayson, to her home, where a cat, a few unpacked boxes, and the silence she had grown accustomed to over the years awaited her. Celine didn't seek noise and never feared silence, but she knew there was a different silence. There was the kind that brings peace, and there was the kind that foretold a storm. She noticed him in the rearview mirror, a black and white car with lights on top. It appeared suddenly, but with insistent determination. It followed her steadily, not getting closer, but not falling behind either. She took her foot off the gas, allowed herself to slow down. The car remained behind her. Then she put on her turn signal, smoothly moved to the shoulder, and stopped. Through the mirrors, she saw the police officer getting out of his car. White, around 30, with a sturdy build and a gaze that held boredom, seasoned with authority. He approached her window leisurely, hand resting on his holster, tapping on the glass. She rolled down the window, greeting him politely. "Papers," he said briefly, without bothering to explain the reason for the stop. His face was cold. Celine handed him her driver's license and registration. He didn't even glance at them, only asked, "Where are you headed?" "Home to Grayson." "What were you doing in Arcane?" "I was participating in command training. I'm military." "Military," he repeated with a hint of irony. "ID?" Celine nodded, opened the glove compartment, and took out her military ID. He took it, scrutinized it, then returned it. "Step out of the car," he said, his voice flat. "I'd appreciate an explanation for the stop," she said. "I said, step out," he snapped, his tone harsher. He looked at her like a figure in a painting, not a person. But Celine had seen that look many times before. He wanted submission, wanted to feel in control. She stepped out, the wind lifting the hem of her jacket. She stood straight, hands away from her pockets. "Officer, I respect your work," she said. "But according to federal law, I have the right to know the grounds for the stop and for your demand that I leave my vehicle. You seemed suspicious. The car is registered to someone else." "It's registered to my mother. The insurance and registration are up to date." "Open the trunk." "Without a warrant, there's no probable cause." He moved closer. His face tightened. "You're resisting." "I'm exercising my right to remain silent." He looked at her, as if deciding. Then he reached for his radio and said, "Suspect, black female, approximately 40 years old, refuses to cooperate. Requesting a search for suspected transport of contraband. Backup required." Celine didn't move, but her fingers tightened slightly. Not fear, but cold calculation. She carefully took out her phone and opened the communication app. Voice input, identification, Marshal Celine, Colonel. On-site identity verification required. Suspicion of local police officers' abuse of power. Coordinates. Active. She spoke this calmly, her gaze unwavering from the officer who continued to press his hand against his holster. 15 minutes later, the road was filled with new sounds. Not police sirens, but military ones. A jeep with 2 military personnel arrived, one of them a colonel in the Signal Corps. He approached the officer. "Officer Cole," he said. We received a message from our colleague. I've verified her identity. Colonel Marshall, active duty officer. I'll ask you to explain the reason for the stop. Cole reddened but tried to maintain his composure. She was being combative, refused to comply. On what basis? The colonel asked. Suspicious behavior, Cole said. That's not a legal basis. You've exceeded your authority. Until this is clarified, you're to cease interaction with civilians. We'll file reports and hand over the data to the county management. Cole stepped back. His eyes darted around. He looked at Celine as if he wanted to say something, but didn't. She silently got back into her car. When the military jeep left, Celine didn't immediately start the engine. She sat, breathing quietly, slowly. She knew this wasn't over. Such looks, like his, don't disappear with just a reprimand. But now he knew she wasn't someone to be treated however he pleased, and she knew the real game was about to begin. She would be ready. The city of Kellaway looked peaceful, too peaceful, as it seemed to Celine. The morning streets of this post-rain city shone under the bright light, as if nothing had happened. People rushed about their business. Shops opened. Bakeries released the aroma of vanilla and fresh bread into the air. But beneath this facade, this polite prosperity, there was a shadow. Celine knew the shadow wasn't in the city, it was in the person. In one specific person, whose name she remembered like a threat, Jarrett Cole. He wasn't a novice. In the archives Celine requested through the Ministry of Defense's legal channels, there were already complaints. Minor at first glance, rough treatment, stops without cause, intimidation, all closed, withdrawn, not confirmed, yet recurring. Celine flipped through the pages late in the evening in the semi-darkness with a cup of cold coffee in her hands. She wasn't looking for a place, she was looking for a pattern, and she found it. The Ministry of Defense's Legal Support Service responded quickly. A colonel in the Signal Corps filing a complaint against a local officer's actions wasn't an everyday case. The documents were accepted, and investigation began. Cole was temporarily removed from street patrol, reassigned to the office, pending investigation. This was the first official action, but not the last. 3 days later, Celine noticed his car at the supermarket, parked a little further from the parking lot, lights off, windows tinted. He didn't approach, just sat or watched. She didn't think much of it. The first time might be a coincidence. She walked past, not hurrying her step, not showing it. Only her fingers on her phone automatically dialed short notifications and sent the coordinates to the military surveillance system. The next day, she saw the same car at the gas station where she always bought coffee on her way to the base, and again, motionless, without intervention, just a presence, intrusive, cold. She told herself not to panic. He wanted her to be afraid, to feel that the boundaries were conditional, even if the law stood behind them, but she was not one to back down. Celine reported to the county's internal security department and filed an additional complaint. Parallel to this, a new device appeared in her home, a panic button directly linked to the military police. She knew it would be difficult for him to stop. Men like Cole, humiliation doesn't destroy them, it fuels their anger. He couldn't believe that a woman, and a black one at that, dared to go against him and didn't back down. He didn't see an officer in her. He saw only a challenge. A few days later, she went out for her morning run. Everything was as usual. Music played in her earphones. Her heartbeat matched her pace. Her body worked like clockwork. She turned onto a deserted country road she liked to run on weekends. Nothing but dust and the horizon ahead. Suddenly, the music stopped. Her phone lost its signal. Then a message arrived. Surveillance point active. Surveillance confirmed. Coordinates match Cole's vehicle number. Celine stopped. Her heart beat faster, but her breathing remained steady. A car appeared on the horizon. A black Dodge. Too familiar. It moved slowly, without sound, without signal, just following the same route, like a predator after its prey. She didn't run. She returned to her car, started it, drove home calmly. On the way, she called her lawyer. Then to the Committee for the Oversight of Human Rights in Law Enforcement. She requested an urgent hearing. They listened, They recorded everything, but so far, to no avail. That night, she didn't sleep. Not out of fear, but out of anger. The system knew. The papers were filed, the complaints were registered. But there were no real actions. He didn't attack. He didn't threaten directly. He just drove by. He just stayed in the vicinity. That wasn't enough for charges, but more than enough to feel a trap. Then Celine decided to change her tactics. She moved all the documents related to the case to her lawyer's safe. She installed cameras around her house. She asked her friend, Major Christoph Aden, to install a GPS tracker in her car, so that in case of a chase, the route would be recorded in real time. She prepared herself. And most importantly, she stopped waiting for someone to come and protect her. She was not just a victim, she was military, trained, calm, collected. The next evening, she noticed the same car at the shopping center, then at the gas station, then at the parking lot of her house. But now, she had a plan. She turned on the tracker. She activated the surveillance mode. She left her car at home, switching to another, rented one. Cole didn't notice the switch. He continued to follow the empty car while she, on the other side of the city, worked with the legal team to map out his routes. 3 times he appeared within a 1-kilometer radius of her location. That was enough to legally recognize a threat to her personal safety. The next day, Celine submitted the collected data to the court of Grayston County. Within 48 hours, she was granted a protection order. And Cole, a disciplinary notice with the possibility of immediate dismissal. But she knew he wouldn't stop. Not paper, not armor, not the order, not the protection. In his eyes, she still stood in the way of his power. Celine stood at the window in the twilight. Outside, her street looked as safe as ever, but in her eyes, there was determination now. She wasn't just filing lawsuits, she was preparing to face him. And in that moment, she stopped being just a party in the case. She became its end. It all started with the road, just like before. Straight, empty, unlit, with sparse markings and only occasional strips of light from oncoming cars disappearing in the rearview mirror. But now, Celine drove it differently. Each turn was precise, like a combat maneuver. Her hands gripped the wheel tightly. Her gaze never left the mirrors, not for a second. She wasn't afraid. She was prepared. The system she believed in had failed. All the documents were filed, all the complaints were made, but Cole was still free, and worse, he was still out there. It had been almost 3 weeks since his official suspension, but it took her less than a week to realize he wasn't going to back down. At first, she still hoped they would quietly take him off the streets, and it would all be over. But every time she turned a corner and saw that same car, even just a reflection in a store window, her internal alarm system would kick in. Not fear, instinct. On the last day he appeared at her house, she didn't close the curtains. She just stood at the window, looking straight at him. And he looked back. For a minute, maybe 2. Then he drove off. And the next day, she found out he was no longer responding to the department. No one knew where he was. This was the beginning of the end. Today, she was driving to a friend's place in another city, with Dane's car as an escort, just like they had planned. But on the final stretch, along a back road through the countryside, the signal suddenly cut out. She noticed it first, the little red icon on the navigation screen. Then, a soft click in the engine, and then everything felt strange. The car slowed down, not abruptly, but as if it was losing power on its own. The brakes worked, but the gas didn't. She turned on the hazard lights and pulled over to the side of the road. At the same moment, another car appeared behind her, black, no markings, just cold headlights. She knew, without a word, without a doubt. It was him. She pulled out her phone. No signal. No GPS. She reached for the panic button but immediately realized the system wasn't responding. He was jamming the signal. He was prepared. She was alone. Cole got out of the car, taking his time. In jeans, a black jacket, and a cap. In his hands, a metal pipe, not a gun, not a baton. He knew a firearm would be the end of him. But a pipe, supposedly improvised, a coincidence, self-defense. He stopped a few meters away, looking at her. You thought it would be that easy? His voice was rough, hoarse. You'd drive here, write a few complaints, and I'd disappear. Furthermore, you made a mistake, Cole. You picked the wrong woman. You crossed the line. The line, he smirked. The line was when you refused to obey, and now I have nothing to lose. You'll lose everything, even your freedom. Today, he lunged forward, silently, without warning. The pipe glinted in the headlights. Celine ducked, her body shifted to the side. The pipe missed her by a millimeter. She didn't scream. She just moved, not like a civilian, but like military. Each step precise, each strike calculated. He swung again. She stepped in, closed the distance, and struck his elbow. The pipe flew from his hands. He stumbled back. Furthermore, he kicked her in the stomach. She leaned back, lost balance, but kept it. She lunged forward, delivered a knee strike. He staggered. She didn't press. She waited. He grabbed her shoulder, tried to turn her, and got an elbow to the chin. He fell to the ground, howling, tried to get up, but she was already standing over him, calm, unyielding, breathing heavily, but not panicked. Face down on the ground, hands behind your back, she said. He froze, smirked. You think someone's going to see this? She activated the emergency beacon on her watch. A second later, a hidden beacon flashed to life. Now they knew where she was. The military base, the guards, the communications center. She turned to him. Yes, I do. And I think you'll never touch another woman, another uniform, another road again. He spat at the side. You ruined my life. You ruined it yourself a long time ago, she said quietly but firmly. Headlights lit up the road. Military jeeps approached, then another. Cole was back, his shoulders slumped. He understood when they put him in handcuffs. He didn't resist. He only looked at Celine with that same look that started it all. There was no power in it now, only empty anger. But even that was spent. A military police officer approached her. Are you all right? Yes. Everything's under control. He nodded. The command is waiting. You did everything right. She didn't say anything. She just looked at the road, empty, with its beginning and its end. Celine stood slightly swaying from exhaustion, but there was clarity in her body. At that moment, she understood. Everything she had gone through was not in vain, because now this was not just a personal victory. It was a warning to all who believe that a uniform is a shield for impunity. Now there would not only be a complaint, there would be an end, a deserved, inevitable one. The rain fell all night. It didn't pound. It didn't pour in sheets. It didn't roar against the glass. It just dripped, monotonously, endlessly, as if time had decided to slow down and dissolve into the droplets sliding off the cornice. Morning came slowly. The sky remained overcast, gray, almost metallic. Celine sat at the window table, in the same pose she had fallen asleep in, leaning on her elbows on the wooden surface, with an empty cup before her. The coffee had cooled hours ago, but she hadn't noticed. It had been a day since the incident on the highway, 24 hours since she had activated the distress beacon, and her coordinates had been logged into the system. A day during which she had been arrested, processed, given a statement, and undergone a medical examination, after which the doctor had said, "Physically, you're in good shape. Psychologically, it's open." She had smiled then. She had always had that question open. No voices in her head, no panic. There was something else, an awareness that it wasn't over yet, because Cole was in custody but not convicted, because his lawyer had already given the first interview, calling her a troublemaking commander with a mania for persecution. Because the news feeds were already splitting into two camps, some calling her a hero, others a power-hungry commander. Celine closed her laptop. She didn't read on. There was no point. That same day she went to the base, not on orders, but out of an inner necessity. She was greeted like a commander, like a legend. Some nodded respectfully, some looked confused, some looked away. They didn't all agree with her. She didn't expect them to. She needed something else. Likewise, she required the truth. In the briefing room, Colonel Hawk, her direct superior, was waiting for her, a man with a stern face but clear eyes. He stood up when she entered. "Celine," he said calmly. "Sit down." She sat. He put aside some papers. "You know the case has gone beyond our jurisdiction?" "Yes." The state attorney's office is involved now. Your case will be considered a precedent. If the court rules in your favor, it could change protocols in the interaction between military and civilian police. I was hoping for that, she answered briefly. But you also need to understand. You're in the spotlight now. Your background, your service, your personal life. It's all going to be public record. That's not news. My uniform was also violated by those who were torn apart in the newspapers. I'll manage. He nodded respectfully. Then he handed her a folder. Here are the materials. Photos, conclusions, report on the technical device in Cole's car. It did jam the signal. That's the key. She flipped through it. Graphs, logs, witness statements. Everything was there. She thought, now comes the hardest part, proving the obvious. That evening a reporter came to her, a young woman named Tarlouise, from an independent news portal. No fanfare, no security, just a recorder and attentive eyes. I want to tell your story, she said. The real one. No headlines, no retelling. Just what you feel, what stood behind it, why you didn't back down. Celine looked out the window. The rain had picked up. Because once before, at 26, a sergeant in the office said, "If you want to move up, you've got to keep quiet." She had stayed silent then, and regretted it. But now she speaks, because if she doesn't, he will do it again, or someone like him. What are you afraid of? Celine thought. Not afraid, but know it will be hard. The system doesn't like to change, and if it doesn't, someone else will start. But I will start. The days that followed brought real waves. Support on one side, hundreds of letters, emails, messages from other women, officers, ordinary people, and hate on the other. Fake letters, threatening messages, manipulated videos, even an attempt to hack her email. She enabled two-factor authentication and closed old accounts. Now it was all about one thing, the case against Cole. At the first preliminary hearing in court, he sat opposite her, aged, tired, but still with that same look. With spectators, his lawyer was aggressive, demanding to exclude evidence of surveillance, questioning the legality of Celine's testimony. The judge dismissed almost all of it. Celine held her ground, spoke clearly, without emotion, like on duty, like in an interrogation. Only now she had evidence on her side. At the end of the session, she stepped out into the rain. It was still drizzling. In her hands was a thin folder with a black and white stamp on the cover. Civil case number 7840, Marshall versus Cole. Dane approached her. His coat was wet. You held up, he said. I just spoke the truth. You're being waited for. The criminal case, the next stage. I know, and I'll go. They stood there, two from the system that rarely protects its own, but sometimes makes an exception, when someone goes all the way. Celine returned home, sat at the table, opened her laptop, typed, "How to file a complaint for interdepartmental protocol reform." The lawyer's voice echoed in her head. It will take years, but she didn't think about years. She thought about tomorrow and another woman being stopped, and if she didn't have the tool, she would be alone. And Celine knew what it meant to be alone, and didn't want anyone else to go through that. The rain was still falling, but now it didn't seem like silence. Now it was a march, a beginning. The courtroom was cold, despite the summer outside the windows. The light falling from the high windows cut through the air, as if trying to break everything down into black and white, like the case itself. Celine sat on her side, stiff, straight, hands folded, gaze focused on the empty chair opposite. Today, the main trial begins. Today, everything will be heard, not in conversations, not in articles, not in police reports, but in the ears of the jury, in the voices of witnesses. Today, the truth will find its voice. Cole entered later, in a strict suit with a lawyer whose face seemed to have no expression. He didn't look at Celine, neither did she seek his gaze. She didn't need to prove anything to him. Her goal was not a personal victory. It was the destruction of the structure in which he felt himself immortal. The prosecutor began clearly, without drama, stating the case, the charges, confirming the surveillance materials, the GPS tracker data, the witness testimonies, the technicians, the officers, then called Celine. She walked through the courtroom like she stepped out of a helicopter in a combat zone. not rushing, with an inner core. She answered questions clearly, without theatrics. Likewise, she described the first stop, the tone, Cole's actions, her call for military backup, his suspension, and finally the last encounter on the road. Each fact was confirmed. Her records, photos, video footage after the distress beacon was activated, the medical examination report, the report on the signal jamming technology. Cole's lawyer tried to attack, hinting that she might have provoked him, that her behavior was demonstrative, that she was seeking confrontation, that her military record had incidents of harsh discipline, hinting at written reprimands for straightforwardness. Celine answered, "I've lived by the rules all my life, even when they were ignored. But if discipline is a crime, then the system is guilty, not me. It teaches us to stand, but punishes us for not falling." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked up from his papers for a moment. Then the witnesses came. The military technician confirming the signal interference, Major Dane, describing the observation of Cole's car, Celine's neighbors, describing her nervous vigilance in the last weeks, and the officers involved in the arrest. One of them said, "We arrived 9 minutes after the distress button was activated. We expected a routine technical issue, but we saw Officer Cole with a pipe in his hands, standing over Colonel Marshall. She didn't just call us. She prevented a tragedy." The defense tried to dispute, to doubt the evidence, to paint a picture of human error, emotional outburst, desperation. But each phrase crumbled against the facts. The prosecutor finished. "This is not a story of a woman and a man. It's a story of power and its limits, of one person forgetting their oath, deciding they could be judged, jury, and executioner, and of another person, despite the fear, preserving their dignity." Celine didn't smile, didn't tremble. She just listened, like a soldier awaiting an order. When the jury returned, it was in one short moment. The judge took the protocol, straightened up, and said, "Cole Jarrett is found guilty of abuse of power, unlawful harassment, attempted assault under the given circumstances. Sentence: 3 years imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Dismissal from law enforcement with a lifelong ban on holding similar positions." The courtroom was silent. Then someone exhaled. Celine just nodded, not out of joy, but out of completion. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was no longer carrying someone else's actions. When she stepped out of the building, journalists, cameras, lights, questions were waiting. She said only one thing: "This is not a victory. It's a necessity." And let it be a beginning. A week later, she filed documents for a project to reform civilian-military interaction. It included points about direct military command notification in case of conflicts, mandatory registration of all stops, and internal oversight, including independent representatives. A month later, a letter arrived from a woman she didn't know. It had only 2 lines. "I saw you stand, and now I stand too. Thank you." Celine kept it in a drawer, next to her military ID, and a faded note from her father, also a soldier, who once wrote, "Be higher, but not detached from the earth." Now she knew, being higher meant not staying silent, not being afraid, not submitting where injustice begins. That evening, she drove down that same road again, not out of fear, but because she wanted to go through it again, slowly, with the windows open, with the lights on, to tell herself now she was free and forever change the rules.